What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video and you're watching us currently on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sit Down video. If you're checking us out on iTunes, Google Pods, or Spotify, on the audio, what's up? Welcome in. Hope you, as always, enjoy the show. If you haven't, do us a favor and leave me a 5-star review and a comment. Let me know what you think of the show. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? I am your host, Jeff Nadu, and as always, we are presented by Barstool Sports. It's that time of the week for another episode of the Sit Down. And, you know, I always say this, I'm excited about this week's episode. We got a great guest, as always, but before we do that, I want to tell all of you about Harry's. And I've told you about Harry's before. Look, guys, you ever go to the grocery store, you ever go to the drugstore, and you look at razors and you say, why are razors so expensive? Why are they $20, $30? I do it all the time. Look, I've talked before. I get my hair cut twice a week. I love looking good. I got to actually shave tonight. And you know what I'm going to use? I'm going to use Harry's. Truth of the matter is, Harry's never lets you down. Their razors are incredibly sharp, and they're made at their own factory in Germany. Most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, cost is important, and they cost as little as $2 a blade. It's time that you get a quality razor you can depend on, delivered straight to your door from Harry's. I use Harry's every time I shave, whether it's their facial products, their body wash, the razors themselves. It's just that good of a product. And I love the look. I love the packaging. It comes in boxed containers. It's just great. It looks sleek. It looks sharp. And look, as I've mentioned before, they're well-made products, right? 5-blade German engineered, weighted handle. You're going to get the shaving gel. You're going to get the travel cover. And you're going to get, and you can set up replacement blade deliveries whenever you need them with refills as little as $2. It's important that you stop paying too much for quality grooming care. Go ahead, get yourself some great razors, whether it's hydrating lotions, body washes, shaving cream, post-shave balm, whatever you need, Harry's got you covered. They have the highest customer service satisfaction in the shaving industry, and they're still offering a no-risk trial. You don't like your shave? No worry. It's on them. Don't get overcharged for overhyped razors. Go do what I did. Get Harry's right now. In the description of this video, I left a link, but if you go to harrys.com/sit, you're going to get a Truman style shave set valued at $15 for just $3. Again, a $15 Truman shave trial set. It costs $15, but they're going to give it to you for just $3 as long as you use our website link, harrys.com/sit. Get it in the description of this video and be like me. Who doesn't want to be like me? Get Harry's right now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into episode, what are we at? 109. And you know, it's interesting because one of my favorite guests we have on is a recurring guest. It's the great Scott Burnstein. You can find him at the Gangster Report. You can find him on the Original Gangsters podcast. I see he's got the hat on in the video. Scott, you know, I look back on June 15th, 2022, you came on and we did a show and it was called The Current State of the Mafia in America in 2022. And I don't know about you, but I feel like every, let's say, 8 to 12 months, I think it's important to take a look and reassess the situation going on in America with what you and I both talk about, the mafia. So I figured, let's get you on. I want to not only talk about some of the different cities. You and I have kind of went back and forth. We argue all the time. What do we consider active? What do we consider defunct? So we're going to go through each city, talk about, you know, kind of the hierarchy, maybe some up and comers. And we're also, which is different from the other show, we're going to get into, we've had some recent major releases from federal prison, from different families, Colombo crime family, Bonanno crime families, Gambino crime families, and we're going to start seeing them. So I want to welcome you into the show. It's always good to have you. We've been kind of going back and forth. I come on your show, you come on mine. You're the best person to have on this show. How you doing, bro?
Good, man. Thanks for having me. I love this stuff.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk about it. So what we're going to kind of do is we're going to kind of go through each city. And Scott, you know, I always like when we can get you on because down the road, you're going to come on. We're going to do a Detroit episode. We obviously can talk about the partnership today. They're still an active organization. It's interesting because in the 60s, Scott, the FBI, the powers that be, there were almost 30 active families in America. I mean, you had families.
20. Well, it started with 26, and then some of those families had like offshoots.
Correct.
So yeah, let's say between 25 and 30.
Absolutely. And you had cities, most of the big cities in California, San Jose, San Francisco, LA, San Diego, they all had families. You had Colorado and Dallas and New Orleans and Pittsburgh and all these different places. But when we look today, and I know we've argued a little bit, but we can probably say when it comes to active, there's 10-ish families?
Between probably 10 to 12.
It's really dwindled. And for me, I consider active as, do you have a hierarchy? Do you have, certain people that are in control as capos of smaller, avenues or streets or regions? I think we can argue about one or two of them today. Look, I'm going to put Kansas City here. I know you and I went back and forth on what do we consider an active family. But let's kind of just jump into it, Scott. I want to start with the city and region of, I'm not the city, but city of Boston, the New England region, the patriarchal crime family, if you will. And this is something when we did the show before, you kind of mentioned to me that there's kind of an up-and-comer or two that maybe he's in control. The FBI will tell us that Carmine the Cheeseman D'Annunzio is the family's boss currently. We've seen him under indictment. We see him walking out of the courthouse there. We've heard the name, Matt Guglielmetti. We've heard the name Eddie Lato. We've heard Spucky Spagnuolo. I guess if I'm asked, who do I think the de facto head is? It's probably Cheeseman. I think Spucky's probably your up-and-comer as far as leadership. And I think
he's an
underboss.
He's an OG. I mean, I wouldn't say he's an up-and-comer, but I would say he's the acting. I think he's acting for the D'Annunzio brothers. I think he's the actual day-to-day, from what I've heard from people in New England, that Spucky is the kind of the day-to-day boss there. But the D'Annunzio brothers, Carmine and his brother Anthony, are kind of the final say. And then we definitely have had news out of New England since we recorded last summer. According to the Rhode Island State Police, in some documents that were put into court filings back October or November of 22, it came out that Eddie Lato had replaced Matty Guglielmetti as underboss, so as the official number 2 guy in the Patriarchos. I don't think it was like a demotion. Matty, good-looking Matty, or Matty Googs, one of the more well-respected LCN members, in all the East Coast, I would say. He's battling some health issues, which I think made him take a step back. But based on these court filings and some of these state police affidavits, it's clear that Matty Guglielmetti right now is the focus of a federal drug investigation.
And that's the problem that all these families are dealing with, right? We've heard so much the word street boss, front boss, because these guys kind of have to take a step back because of the government trying to come down on these guys, eliminate the mafia. And, Lato's an interesting guy because he's been around a long time. He was in Bobo Marapisi's crew many years ago, been around really since the 70s. I want to say he's been arrested like 30 times.
Yeah, he's a guy that's done a lot of prison time, a suspect in an open murder investigation, but I use open with quotes because I think if the case was going to get made, it would have been made already. That's the 1992 gangland slaying of Kevin Hanrahan, who was a Irish enforcer who worked for the Italians and was a suspect himself in a number of murders. And Bobby DeLuca, I know the names get confusing. Bobby the Cigar DeLuca, the former capo who flipped in the last decade, he copped a plea to the Hanrahan murder, and in his debriefings named Eddie Lato as one of the shooters. So everyone kind of thought that when Lato was coming out of prison a couple years ago, there was a good chance that either he might not make it out of prison, they would indict him before he got out, or shortly after he got indicted, or shortly after he got released, he'd be indicted, and none of that's come to fruition. So, and I know that grand juries were convened. I don't think the case is ever coming.
This has been a group that has been very maligned. We obviously know about the corruption they've had up there with the FBI. We know about Whitey Bulger. We know about the Angelos. We know about the constant involvement of law enforcement. And I think that's kind of the definition of this group right now. They're very fractured because of constant battles with the FBI. Denunzios, they're kind of out of the picture because of that. Guglielmetti's, they're kind of out of it. So it's kind of grabbing some of the fracturedness and trying to push in these guys like your Eddie Latos in Rhode Island, your Spuckies in Massachusetts. And look, again, the common theme with this family and all the families we're going to talk about today, the Mafia, as you and I both know, has a major issue with Father Time, right?
Yeah.
Most of the people we're going to get into, the next family we're going to talk about, when you look at like New Jersey, the Cavalcanti crime family, I mean, literally every person in the hierarchy is like 80, 82. Like they're all old. And it's like,
I recently wrote something about them and I got some pretty good sourcing on it. I think their family's actually doing pretty well. I know that their administration is very old, as you said. Well, let me take that back. My recent reporting, their boss and their consigliere are both very old.
sure.
But I was told, I believe that this sourcing is really strong, that they have an underboss right now who's relatively young in the mob. I think he's in his 60s. That sounds old. Maybe late 50s, early 60s. Little Joe Giacobbe, whose dad was Uncle Joe. So, and I know there are some younger guys. They lost a guy, Joe Red Merlot, who was a younger guy that was kind of an acting boss, underboss, who died of cancer. But I think they got about 30 guys, like 30 active guys.
I mean, Majuri's in his 80s.
He's the reputed boss. Charlie Stango just came out of prison.
He's in his mid 70s, I believe.
Yeah.
You have a lot of guys. Now, again, it's all about bringing up the rear, right? You got, you mentioned, several guys, Philip Abramo's around. Like they have a couple of guys that are coming up. But for a small family, for a lot of strong leadership, a lot of those guys are old. Stango's going to be under the microscope. He just got out. His son, I believe, is still inside.
His son's out. And I don't have a problem with saying this on this broadcast. I haven't written it. I don't know if I will, but again, I'm pretty well sourced on this. That there was a debate recently in that crime family related to Stango's son, Anthony Whitey Stango. And when I say debate, I think maybe argument is more appropriate. And from what I've heard, Charlie Stango is adamant that his son get a button, and there are other leaders of the crime family that don't want Anthony Stango in the family, partially because he's half Irish, and then also partially I heard, if you've ever looked at his social media, he's very he dresses and acts a certain way.
Yeah.
And I don't know if
very urban.
I don't know if old school guys like Charlie Big Ears want the guys that are in jacket and tie, maybe a tracksuit. But this guy looks like he's walking out of a Little Pump concert. Or
I used to get a kick. It's funny. I don't know if you remember. There was a Bonanno bust. Ernie Aiello was actually in many of the pictures as well. There was a head cracker in the Bonanno family. He was caught. They picked him up. He was wearing an Echo Unlimited sweatshirt, I think. This guy, he looks like this Stango kid looks like he would have fit right in. And, like 2006 with the jerseys and the pink t-shirt. Like he's a newer age kid. He likes, he's an urban kid, but there's definitely a strong, wonder down the road is how is he going to kind of mix in with some of these older guys?
And as you said about Stango, he's an old guy. I mean, I think he's 76,
73.
73. Yeah. But again, I think I have pretty good sourcing on this. I hear he's telling people he wants to be boss. He's jumps between Jersey and Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
There's two very distinct sides in that DeCavalcante family right now. You got the old school John Riggy faction, and then you have kind of a newer school group of guys. The guy that I've heard as the up and comer, or the younger guy in the Riggy faction is Lou Oliveri. They call him the dog. He's got like a long face that kind of looks like a basset hound. And there was some debate about when he got made. John Riggy actually made him himself, and there were other people that didn't want him to get made, but he got made, and he's, from what I understand, has kind of worked his way to the top of that faction. And so he's younger. Stango's not young, but is claiming that he wants a bigger leadership position. I don't know. I guess only time will tell.
Another family that has been absolutely pummeled by government informants. You look at, I mean, John D'Amato was killed. You got Rotundo, Capo, Vinny Ocean, Guarino. I mean, they've had so many. And look, ask yourself this, Scott, is the strongest group of individuals as far as the mafia in this state? They're not in this family.
No, they're in the Lucchese family.
Right. So it's like, you have, and we'll get into them when we get to the Pernas, when we get to Lucchese's towards the end of the show. This is a family, when we quote them, the real Sopranos, right? They have a lot of the same issues that have plagued, this subculture for a long time. The FBI and government informants, plus age, and this is the long-term 20-year kind of thing down the road with the mafia in America. Buffalo is a group that is they kind of went away. We kind of forgot about them. And then there was a major resurgence.
Then they reemerged. Yeah.
Right.
They're a real sleeper right now, from what I can understand.
And I do want to throw this in when we talk about Buffalo, interestingly enough. I get DMs all the time. Did my boss, Dave Portnoy, know that he was speaking to?
He had no idea who he was talking to. He went for that pizza review.
So what I'm going to do is in several weeks, I'm probably going to do it in June sometime. I'm actually going to get Dave to come on the show. We're going to talk a little bit about pizza and just kind of some of his – I want to talk about pizza and its involvement in the mafia, because it's so interesting, right? How many guys own pizzerias, you get the pizza connection. We're going to kind of do a dual episode, but I'm going to get Dave on for a couple of minutes, ask him about it. From what I understand, at the time he had no idea, but he was told after the fact.
How would you, though? Unless you're paying attention to stuff, how would you know?
Right. Now, look, if it's me, obviously I would know, you would know, but most people that live in that neighborhood, they don't talk about it, right? And that's kind of the hearts and minds thing with the mob. You just don't really talk about it. But Joe Todaro is a successful guy, right?
Very, very successful.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a huge pizza chain, La Nova. I've heard and I've never been able to confirm this. I'd be curious, someone in Buffalo, maybe you can confirm it. I've heard that Joe Todaro and his father were the originators of the Buffalo Wing. Is that
well? Correct? I don't think they weren't
they mastered it, I guess.
From my research, they weren't necessarily the originators of it, but they were the ones that
kind of blew it up.
They're the ones who took it out of Buffalo,
right? Like made it
Nova chain,
yeah,
right? Kind of nationalized Buffalo Wings by their.
I look at them like
putting those into grocery stores.
Yeah, I look at them like kind of in a way, I relate it to like the person that took the cheesesteak in Philadelphia and blew it up was Joey Vento, right? Owns Geno's. He kind of made it a national thing. These guys are well known. They're I mean, I think they're the official pizza of the Buffalo Bills.
I was going to say, do you know who else doesn't pay attention? The NFL and the NHL.
Yeah,
because
really
both the Buffalo Sabres and the Buffalo Bills have official partnerships with the NFL, and it doesn't seem like. And if you're Joe Todaro, to make the case for Joe Todaro,
exactly,
he's never been convicted of any federal racketeering offenses. Yeah. The closest thing you can get is that he was booted out of a labor union in the 90s for alleged mob connections. He's been indicted and been on trial a couple times over the years, but he beat all those charges, and he has no criminal record.
And that's the thing. Joe Todaro can very much lean on the whole, I'm being persecuted because I'm a businessman. I have an Italian name. I've never been convicted. And he has something that literally 0.5% of people involved with this world have. They don't have a criminal record. He doesn't have a criminal record, never spent an hour in prison. He has very little negative, issues around him.
Now, that all said, the DEA, the FBI, Border Patrol. It looks like just optics. I don't have anything, sourced that this is some official game plan to try to ensnare Joe Todaro. But if you just know the way that the government works to try to get to somebody, they start chipping away at the people around them.
But
And
Scott, here's the problem.
A lot of people around Joe Todaro have ran into legal problems in the last 5 years.
Oh, by the time they ultimately build something against him, Joe Todaro is old, just like his father, right?
Right.
Now, the guy below him, Domenico Violi, who comes from mob royalty as well, his father, Paolo Violi, Montreal, Catroni crime family, Bonanos, a lot of overarching connections there. He's, essentially made it. He has Sopranos posters when he gets arrested. We've seen some of the links.
Not just posters, he has personally signed by all of the stars of Sopranos to Dom.
And we've heard people like Sammy Gravano come out and say, hey, I've met with Joe Todaro, and we actually went out in the middle of the ocean to discuss, like we would swim out in the middle of the ocean, and that's where we would talk, right? There are these kind of stories, but
I got him all.
I'm a businessman.
I got him all over FBI documents here in Detroit because, again, this wasn't like, I'm not speculating. I mean, this was brought in federal court. The Detroit Mafia, along with the Buffalo group and the Chicago mob, put together a deal to buy the land and build the casino, the Edgewater Casino, which was in Laughlin, Nevada, not in Las Vegas, about 90 miles away from Las Vegas. And when that deal was being put together, the feds had an informant on the inside, and both Joe Todaro's, Big Joe and Lead Pipe Joe and Big Joe, were coming in Detroit, hammering out that deal with Jack Tocco, who was the Godfather, Jimmy Quazzarano, who was the consigliere. I have like exactly where they were eating, where they were staying, who they were. So he's definitely been surveilled and recorded and put with lots of major people, although he's never actually been convicted of a.
What do we and I'm curious about your thoughts on this individual I'm about to ask. We know that Joe, the surviving Joe Todaro, the alleged boss of the family, has a son, Joe the Third,
Joey.
He was arrested for assault in the late 90s. Definitely kind of a young gun kind of kid, hung around some kids and people. We know he's very involved with the pizza chain as well. What do we know about him?
I just know things that you can kind of, and this is, again, he's not been convicted of anything. He's not been indicted for any organized crime activities. He's just around a lot of it, so you can kind of speculate. But what we know for sure, again, based on court records and affidavits and testimony, that his nephew, Peter Geraci Jr., who's under indictment right now, is going to be going to trial later this summer on racketeering, drug prostitution, and so forth. Owns a strip club. There's been recent grand jury testimony in the last couple months where employees at his strip club went in front of the grand jury and said Peter Geraci Jr., Joe Todaro's nephew, his sister's son, brags or has bragged to his employees at Pharaoh's strip club that he's a made member of the Mafia.
Which isn't surprising. We've seen a lot of Geraci's name. He's involved with police, and there's
a DEA. He's going on trial with a retired DEA agent that's accused of protecting Buffalo mob drug dealers. They also have another part of this case where there was a plea deal with another alleged mob member who recently took a plea to go do 7 years in prison for drug dealing. And as part of that plea, he says that this DEA agent was protecting all of.
I was going to bring up one of the interesting stories about Buffalo. I always go back to is kind of the real life. Not that Michael Masecchia was selling methamphetamine, but he was this, a teacher who was selling. He was selling large amounts of marijuana for like a long time.
For 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of reminds you of like, the Walter White type of thing, right?
Yes.
Obviously not to the level he's selling weed. White was selling meth, but just a really interesting group because I think they're a lot more burgeoning than we think. We know they're very close to Hamilton and Montreal and Toronto, and they have a strong leader.
I recently wrote something about the resurgence. You can check it out on gangsterreport.com. And I was able to get some really good federal documentation, court filings that I wasn't able to get. I had to get through people that were given. I couldn't get them through Pacer. I had to get there. Some of them were sealed. I had to get them from some of the attorneys and whatnot. And I thought I was able to do a pretty good job of tracing the rejuvenation of the family. And according to these informants and these reports, this was a very coordinated effort to revive the crime family by the alleged boss, Joe Todaro Jr. And he had left day-to-day affairs in the 2000s for almost a decade and had turned it over to his father's longtime consigliere, Lenny Falzone. And Lenny was just an older guy. I don't think he was someone that was looking to grow the family, and the family languished and had attrition. A lot of guys died. They lost their contacts with a lot of the other crime families. And in around 2014, I heard 13 or 14, Todaro decided to come back. And part of this effort was reaching out to the 5 families in New York, becoming more tied in to what was going on with the leaders of those 5 families, making new guys, diversifying, having kind of a restructuring.
Urging, yeah.
Yeah. Canada was a big part of his plan from what I understand. And this is
kind of in the middle.
Court records.
Right, between Canada, New York, he's kind of right there. Definitely an interesting group, an interesting guy. I mean, Joe Todaro is he's another one, no spring chicken, old guy at this point, but
But as you said, Don Violi, though, is only 40. Hey, Don Violi's maybe late 40s, early 50s.
He's got some young.
His brother Joey's relatively young too.
The thing about Todaro that I always find interesting is he plays a very thin line between him and like what people think he is, right? If you watch that Peach review, he literally jokes about.
Yeah, we don't say that word. We don't say that word
and laugh. Like it's kind of a game with him, and I think he gets a kick out of. Kind of the thought of who he is, and people just kind of know, Let's go to Philadelphia, and then we'll kind of go out to Detroit and Chicago and a little bit of Kansas City, and then we'll do the 5 families.
Philly's quiet, real quiet now.
Philly, it's such an interesting place, right? Because you and I have had arguments about this. I've told you before. The FBI believes, and everybody believes, that the boss is Joey Merlino, right? We've done shows on Joey. I think he's one of the most underrated people ever associated. We know he was involved with that life.
He's the most compelling figure of American organized crime watching of the last 30 years. I don't think you can even debate it.
He's super interesting. He is, though, now in his 60s. He has 2 grown daughters who have, they're ready to start their own families, I'm sure. He's got a wife who, he spent a lot of time away from. He's been in prison a lot, right? And he lives in Florida. I think the question that's always been around Joey is, how does he make a living, right? He has this big home or townhome or nice cars or whatever. Do I think he has friends that are in that world? Sure, of course he does. I don't think no one will ever dispute that. I don't believe he is currently the boss. I think somebody else is. We can question that and wonder. We remember, I think it was in 2015, it was a party up in New York. And, Michael Lancelotti was introduced as this is the boss of Philadelphia. We've heard Joe Legambi was for years. We've heard all sorts of different names. Who does Scott Burnstein believe is the leader?
I think we've talked about this before, and I'll just rehash, my view of it. And I think there's middle ground between what we're both saying. I don't think Joey Merlino is active mob boss in the way that a traditional active mob boss would be behaving. I don't think that he really has anything to do with the day-to-day machinations or operations of what's going on in Philadelphia La Cosa Nostra. But I believe that both what the FBI believes and what the organization believes is that the top of the heap is Joey, and Joey's still seeing a piece of everything that's going on. This is my opinion. Whether or not he's conducting it or puppeteering it or not, he's seeing action from it. But I do believe that Philadelphia, North Jersey, I don't believe that Joey is chiming in on day-to-day running of those areas or making his opinions or feelings felt. I believe that George Borghese right now is the acting. Here's another thing I heard, and I think this is an insight into Joey. I heard Joey likes titles. Joey likes giving out titles to people, makes them feel good, helps with morale in the organization. So there's always been a lot of buffers and insulation in the Joey era. So I think that Georgie Borghese is the final say on the street in Philadelphia right now. I think Mikey Lance has been street boss at some level for the last decade, and that basically Mikey Lance and Georgie Borghese run the family. Before you had Dom Grande and Stevie Mazzone, who I think were involved in leadership as well. But so do I think Joey is boss? Yes. Do I think he has any boss duties? No.
Philly's interesting because you have so many regions, right? You have North Jersey, right? You have a crew. You have South Jersey, right? You have Delaware. You have Delco, right? I mean, we've heard Delco's mentioned a lot. You have, different kind of people. The guys that live in South Philly, right? They live in the area. Lancelotti, Grande, those. I think Borghese may live in Jersey at this point, but either way, they're all kind of in the vicinity. There's so many different kind of group in
the name. I think that you should, not you, but the proverbial you, should be kind of watching right now if we're talking about the Philadelphia mob administration. And again, this is different than when we talked last summer, is Mousy, Joe Mouse, Joe Massimino, the underboss in the 2000s, came out of prison recently. I heard he's holding court every day at some type of, I don't know, it was a grocery store or a sandwich shop that he's working for his supervised release. He's sweeping up the place, and I guess people are coming there and interacting with him. Not criminals, just people coming to say hi. People from the neighborhood coming to kind of pay their
respect. Very respected individual,
incredibly respected. You want to talk about a guy? You said about someone who's been arrested a lot, and Eddie Lato. I mean, Mousy can give little Eddie a run for his money in that department.
He's really been in and out since like the early 2000s, and
he's been in and out since he was a teenager.
He's reminiscent in a way, like respect wise, to like a Chicky Chang who recently passed.
Yeah. But I think
obviously not as old, but
a little younger, a little healthier.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it should be people that watch this stuff. I've been told. I wouldn't be shocked if he makes his way into the underboss position when he's a little bit further removed from supervised release.
Yeah, he seems built like an ox. I mean, if you've ever seen the guy,
he loves the life. You want to talk about a guy that if you want to look for someone who's running through their bloodstream and is in his DNA and has no desire to be just a regular Joe citizen, that's Joe Mouse.
An interesting group for sure.
Yeah.
They always leave people wondering for sure. And look, people like Dom, they're locked up right now. We'll see what remains to be seen with them. They got a couple of years to go, and Dom's kind of one of the younger guys of the group. Let's go out to your neck of the woods, Scott. Detroit. This one's pretty easy. This group, when I say underrated, obviously I'm not from Detroit. Is it my wheelhouse? Absolutely not. But I think you have to look back in the over 110-year history of this group. I mean, you've won mob informant ever. I mean, it's definitely a very strong group with a lot of strong leaders. The city now, like many, has become a group that's dominated by black organized crime or gangs. But
I think that there should be for people that aren't from Detroit, they should understand the delineation between Detroit proper and then what's considered Metro Detroit. The Tri-County area. And the Detroit Mafia, the Italian Mafia, has been with there's some exceptions, but for the for the most part, have been out of Detroit proper
Right.
for 40 years.
Sure.
So
It's a big metropolitan area,
yeah,
right?
so they've been into the they've been doing most of their racketeering in the suburbs, since the 80s. And like you said, there's a lot of that territory has been scooped up by black street gangs that at one point in time, all those black drug gangs and street gangs back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they all worked for the Detroit Mafia, the Italians. They worked for the Giacalonis and the Tocos and the Corrados. But when all those guys moved out of Detroit proper or moved, a lot of them were in Grosse Pointe, which is a ritzy area, but it's like literally on the border. It hugs Detroit. So you're still really close to it. When those guys all moved out of Detroit and started moving, some of them moved west, but most of them moved east and north, where now they're a good 30, 40 minutes from the city. It didn't take long. In fact, it was almost simultaneous when a lot of the black African-American groups came in and immediately just came in there and said, we don't need the Italians.
Grabbed it up.
Yeah, grabbed it up.
And we hear the names.
And then Middle Eastern, I should say. There's a lot of Middle Eastern criminals in Detroit. People outside of Detroit don't really know them,
Chaldean, right?
But we have a really we have Chaldean, and then we have traditional Muslim.
Right. And look, we've heard the names: Zerilli, Tocco, Giacalone. Currently, they would tell you that the boss is this individual, Jack Kid, Giacalone. Let me ask you, what's the dynamic between Blackie, Tocco, and him?
So they're, that's so kind of like what I was just talking about in Philadelphia. Jack Giacalone, according to my sources, does not have a ton of hands-on, day-to-day activity with the Detroit mob. He has had kind of a morbid reign. He was the street boss from the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, until he became boss in 2014, according to the FBI. And then at that point, he stepped back and allowed Pete Tocco, Blackie, or Specs, and Anthony LaPiana, Chicago Tony, and another guy who's now dead, Anthony Palazzolo, Tony Pal, who FBI believes is the Jimmy Hoffa's killer. Those three really stepped to the forefront in their 2010s to really take over the day-to-day of the family that Jackie had been doing for the previous 20 years. So they're very Pete Tocco and Jack Giacalone are very close. They meet at least once a week. I know that they have a spot. They meet every Tuesday morning for breakfast and brunch, and they go over what they need to go over. They don't talk at the table because they know there's a chance that table could be bugged. They usually eat their meal and then go out into the parking lot and kind of have a talk about what's going on. And then Pete Tocco and Tony LaPiana have quasi headquarters that are really kind of right next to each other in a suburb called Birmingham, Michigan.
How strong of a group would you say this group is?
I would say that right now they're still pretty formidable, but I don't think the future is bright. I've heard that Jackie has not had any desire to put new blood into the family. I think from what I can understand, the last making ceremonies were in the 2000s, and Jack Tocco made about 10 to 15 people. But I don't think there's been any makings in the last 15 years or so. We're probably at about 25 guys and not a lot of younger guys. The only person I would say that is to be paid attention to as a guy that I didn't mention in the administration is Joe Dana. He is a capo, probably the most powerful capo, has a lot of connections to Sicily and the mafia in Sicily. His uncle is the boss of Palermo. Salvatore Dana is allegedly the boss of the Palermo region in Sicily. His nephew is Joe. They call him Joe the Hood. He's about 63, 64. And I think if there's any family that's going to exist in 10, 15 years from now, it will be guys that are loyal to him. And I think he's who takes over for the current guys that are all 75 and up, but there are no guys that are like in their 30s or 40s. I know like one or two guys. There ain't a lot of younger.
There's no Peter Tuccios in this.
No,
one.
there are no. There's a guy they call Gotti Toko, who's Specs, aka Blackie Toko's nephew, who was Jackie Giacaloni's driver for a while. He's my age. He's about 45. I don't know if he has his button or not, but if there was a younger generation, he would be kind of the guy to look at.
I'm just going to ask you this quickly, Scott. One offshoot name that we've heard recently in the news from your area, White Boy Rick, was pinched. His lawyer claims it's not true.
Yeah.
Is Rick just kind of snake bitten as far as he's just kind of institutionalized? What do you think with him?
Yeah, I'm disappointed for whether or not this proves to be true or untrue. For someone who knows him really well or knew him really well at a point in time, someone who I take credit for getting him out of prison.
Yeah, you had a lot of involvement in your documentary you did.
Yeah, and we have a hit on Netflix right now in the documentary. I built a really strong bond with him for about 12 years or so, and I really believed in my heart of hearts that he wanted to come home and disappear. And it's been the polar opposite. He has rediscovered his White Boy Rick persona from the 1980s, the character that I saw as an elementary school student acting a fool on the television news, and then studied and learned about it more as an adult. He's engaging in a lot of, at least optically, risky behavior, hanging around with risky people, doing risky things, and flashing a lot of money, a lot of toys, a lot of jewelry. And to me, it's a recipe for either him to end up in prison again or dead.
He seems to me, and look, I don't know White Boy Rick, but he seems like a guy that's just never grown up, it seems like.
He's 17. He's 17.
He wants to relive
17 and
relive the times. I will say, though, one of the more compelling stories.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Ever.
And I will say also that if the Hollywood film had been what it should have been, if that Hollywood film would have been a smash hit and everybody in the world or the country knew who he was, I can't imagine what his ego would be like, because his ego right now is the size of the city of Detroit, and nobody outside of Detroit really knows who he is. So if that movie had been a hit, I mean, what we're seeing now would be, I'm guessing, would be nothing compared to what we'd be seeing if that was the case.
I will say, well, not just because we have you on. I mean, I know Seth Ferranti was involved, some other people. The documentary.
Seth was the one who started the documentary and actually brought me on board. So it was really Seth's documentary to start.
If you're looking for a documentary you want to watch, go to Netflix, check out the White Boy Rick documentary that Scott's involved in. You'll see him in it and some other people. Just terrific. Very well done.
When I met with Rick for the first time, because of who I am and where I'm coming from, one of my first questions was like, well, what kind of interactions were you having with the Italians? And like, by the time he was emerging in 1987, 86, 87, he's like, I went to the same place to get my hair cut. He's like, I would see the Giacalonis getting their hair cut. He's like, that's pretty much it.
Right.
And they shared an attorney. His attorney was Bill Buffalino, who was a Giacaloni attorney and was played by Ray Romano in the Irishman movie.
Absolutely. Let's hit Chicago, a group that is very maligned as to where they once were. This is a group arguably at one point the strongest family in America, really. I mean, you had the Tony Accardos, the Paul Ricas, and the Joey Doves, and all these different guys. They controlled everything west of Chicago. Today, I always get a kick out of when the news interviews Sully De Laurentiis, because he'll tell you he's just a carpet
He's just
guy,
a carpet cleaner.
Yeah, he doesn't even know what that word mafia is. He's never heard of it. You got Al Vina. He's kind of an old school guy, Grand Avenue guy. You got some, younger guys coming up, Merlot, those guys. Because what I found interesting of what you said about Detroit is, I think in 2011, the FBI estimated there was about 50 made members. You're looking at about 10 years later, you're saying there's cut in half in Detroit. What are we looking like in Chicago? Because at one point, this is one of the premier organizations in America, the outfit.
So I think my research about modern day Chicago has shown me, if I'm trusting my sourcing, that it is an organization right now that is very decentralized, and you have crews that are all operating, and the loyalty and the pecking order and the way money flows seems to be very specific to each crew, which in some ways you could say that's good. The right hand never knows what the left hand's doing. So in Cicero, you have all these guys that were loyal to Jimmy I. He recently died. Loyal to guys like Sammy Cottadella, who's alleged to be the underboss. Some other guys that are in Elmwood Park, they're loyal to Rudy Fratto. Guys that are on the South Side, they're loyal to the Carusos. So it's almost like when I think there have been a number of making ceremonies in Chicago, but I don't think they've been making ceremonies in the way that where it's like a boss is bringing in members of multiple crews. From what I understand, in the last, let's say 15, 20 years, there's been making ceremonies, but they're making ceremonies that are going on within crews, where the crew capo is making guys that are loyal to him. So like Mike Sarno, who was the boss in the 2000s, whose right-hand man was Sammy Cottadella. Mike is in prison for an extortion beef. He'll be in there for another 10 years or so. But from what I understand, the power right now in the outfit sits in between Elmwood Park and Cicero. Now, Albivina, as you mentioned, I think he is still the street boss. He's out of Grand Avenue. But right now you have the only younger generations you have right now, from what I gather, the true younger generation groups are in Cicero and Elmwood Park, and they're guys that Mike Sarno brought in. I heard there were 20 or some guys that he brought in before he got indicted and went to prison. And then Rudy Fratto's brought in some guys from Elmwood Park, and they're younger guys. They're guys that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Some of them have buttons, some of them don't, but they're more loyal to the crew than they are to the overall organization. Now, Albivina and Solly D, according to the FBI, they're running things on a day-to-day. I think Solly D is exactly like I was talking about Joey and Jackie in Detroit. I don't think Solly D has anything to do day-to-day. I think he takes an envelope and lives his life. And Albie is more of the day-to-day guy. And Rudy's kind of doing his own thing. I heard that he's real autonomous, that Elmwood Park is kind of like even more so than the other crews. It's kind of more so of its own animal.
It's an interesting family because they have, you mentioned all these guys, you have these C notes and these young guys, and you got the Grand Avenue, you got Elmwood Park. You mentioned Fratto, interesting guy, right? Because they say he was made in the same ceremony as Sully De Lorenzo.
Yeah, they were both made in an 80, I believe it was Father's Day, or Mother's Day 88 or Father's Day 88.
And also a weird 6 degrees of separation with Rudy Fratto. You probably heard the last name Fratto before, right? So Howard Stern, there's a guy, Johnny Fratto. He used to come on all the time. Guy lived out in L.A.
Yeah.
Eric the Midget, it was his manager and like kind of business partner.
Rudy's cousin.
His father was Louis Fratto, who was the outfit's kind of liaison and boss in Iowa, Des Moines.
Yeah.
Rudy is the nephew of Louis Fratto. Louis Cockeyed, they called him. He had a weird pair of eyes.
There were two big Frattos, Cockeyed Lou and Frankie the Ear.
Yep.
And then there was, actually, I should say there were 3 Fratto brothers. Then there was Big Rudy Fratto, who was the 3rd brother. So Rudy the Chin is Big Rudy's son, and then Johnny Fratto was Cockeyed Lou's son.
Just a lot of weird separation, 6 degrees of separation, and all there. But
Rudy Fratto, he's another one of these guys. He's pretty unabashed. He likes being a gangster. He likes people knowing he's a gangster. he hangs out at a place in Burr Ridge, an Italian restaurant there. And I heard that, he walks in, the place stops, they get up, everyone gets up, comes and kisses the ring. So yeah, so him and Sally D both kind of came from the same making crop. I'm not positive they were made together. I know they were made in the same year. There were 2 making ceremonies in '88, one in the spring and one in the fall. I get confused on who was made in what ceremony.
Just a really interesting city still. Quickly, Scott, what estimate made guys in Chicago?
Right now, I with all the new guys, yeah, I'd probably say there's 35 to 45 right now made guys with a lot of associates, with guys that I think could be on the verge of getting made. I don't want to get into it, but if you go to my gangster report, you can go look into the Chicago stuff, and I've named 1 or 2 people of this younger generation, guys whose name hadn't been out in the papers before, that I'm being told are like the younger guys that are going to be taking over for this older crew. So, go check that out. I'm not worried about where the Chicago Mafia is going. I think they're in good shape, even if they don't have 100 guys or 50 guys. I think they have things in place. It's just different. Everything evolves. It's just different now.
Before we get into the 5 families, I do want to quickly touch on Kansas City. Look, I want to make this very clear. I do not consider this a family. I think there's just a couple of guys, older guys, that were associated with the Savellas and people like that. Look, do they have a couple of businesses, maybe some gambling? Sure. Are there some guys still around? Absolutely. I don't think that constitutes as a family. And I think the truth of the matter is, west of Chicago, south of Chicago, I don't consider anything a family. I think New Orleans is defunct. Florida is defunct. The only people in Florida are 5 families people. Yeah. I think the only people in LA are 5 families people. All the other cities in, Colorado, all these places. There's
St. Louis is gone. Pittsburgh's gone.
Right. Cleveland.
I think Milwaukee and Cleveland are no longer families, but I think Chicago, in terms of Milwaukee and Cleveland, and then Detroit in terms of Cleveland, I think there's something going on there in both of those cities, but it's not like a family.
We hear the name, John.
But Kansas City, yeah, Johnny Joe.
Yeah, John Ciartino. He was a Savella kind of cohort, and the biggest news in Kansas City, sadly, was the passing of Willie Comisano, who died a couple of months ago. I know when we talked before, there was a GoFundMe set up, and we knew he was pretty sick. In fact, the most newsworthy story outside of this was, you remember about 10 years ago, that kid Michael Sam was drafted?
Yeah, was dating one of the Camasano's kids.
Vito, the son of one of the Camisanos.
Yeah, he was Jerry Camasano's kid.
People looked into him, and they found out his father was this big bookmaker, and it's kind of an interesting story. But all these areas, are there some guys left? Absolutely. I mean, if you go to,
I would respectfully disagree with Kansas City, even though I don't disagree with what you're saying. But from people that I've talked to in Kansas City, I think they're in this middle territory between a group that's kind of been partially absorbed by other groups, as well as they have a functioning administration. I know that these guys are together all the time, and whatever's left on the street, whether or not they're soldiers or capos or anything, Johnny Joe and Las Vegas Pete and Frank DeLuna are the OGs. Now, whether they're just OGs looking after something that's not a family, possibly. Are they OGs looking after, what's left of a family? I think that's kind of my personal opinion.
Well, there was some interesting news actually 2 days ago in Missouri. I don't know if you know this, but they voted down sports betting yet again. So, a lot of the certain areas, that could be a very driving business in Missouri, northern Kansas City. We also have seen in Ozark, they represent the Mafia in Ozark as some Irish guy.
Right. Some like Joe Cosgrove, who's supposed to be from Detroit in the storyline.
Yeah.
That didn't make sense. Yeah. But I've also heard there's a guy in Kansas City that is kind of being groomed to assume what's ever left of this. So I'm not going to argue about what, it's not a traditionally functioning family. That is true. I don't think they have the structure of of an LCN family. I don't think they have capos and soldiers, but I do think there are 3 or 4 old timers that run semblance of an organization. I think they are a group that is being propped up in some cases by Chicago. I know for a fact that one of Rudy Fratto's, I don't want to say lieutenant, someone who's very close to Rudy Fratto, has a residence in Kansas City and is in Kansas City quite a bit and is doing business with all of the Kansas City wise guys. Strip club business, nightclub business. And then there's another guy, Vincey Black, who's in prison right now, is going to be coming out at some point in the next couple of years. And I have on good authority that he hooked up with some Philadelphia guys inside. Georgie Borghese knows him, and that there's some stuff going on between him and them, and that Vincey is a guy that he's in his, I think in his early 60s or late 50s, is a guy that I've been told when Johnny Joe and those guys step away, Vincey will kind of step in there. Again, I don't know what a family is, but there's something there.
Right. And I always get, when we do these shows, right, I always get, 2 or 3 people, I'm here in Kansas City and they're here. And it's like, well, they're on life support. There's not much. Do I think there's a couple of guys that maybe control certain vices and things? Probably. Absolutely.
And then there's 2 guys from the traditional families. One whose name I'll throw out there because it's pretty public, and one I'll just say that he comes from one of those old school Kansas City mob families. I don't think he himself has ever been indicted, but I've heard that he's a guy that is kind of a younger guy that's around. But Joe Pete Simone, who's Las Vegas Pete's son, he's in his 50s, former minor league baseball player, someone who wanted to be an actor, and is a suspect in the last known Kansas City Mafia murder from 1996. And he's a guy that people point to as kind of a younger guy that's tied into the older guys.
It'll remain to be seen what happens with them. But don't jump on us. Don't jump on me. I don't consider it a family, but there's definitely some guys.
They could jump on me. I stand by what I report.
All good. And I know you do. Before we get into New York, we'll have some fun there. Talk a little bit about some guys that just got out. Before we do that, though, I do want to remind everyone, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Support the show. That's the greatest thing you can do to help me, the Sit Down. Support the show, please. You support what we're doing. I'm very proud of it, and I want to thank all of you for that. I also want to tell you to go check out Scott Burnstein. You can check him out on the Gangster Reports, one of the foremost authorities on organized crime in America. You can also check him and Jimmy Bucciolato on the Original Gangsters podcast. I went ahead and made sure we included it in the description as you watch. Make sure you check that out. Always enjoy Scott coming on. Scott, let's get in. We'll kind of fly through some of these because we've talked ad nauseum about some of them. The Bonanno crime family, you and I, there's been a lot of news with them. You've talked and reported about some things.
In terms of the Bonannos, I think this is new, and I reported it, and I stand by it.
Real quick, let me just say, the boss, I think we all know this, the boss of this family is Michael Mancuso. We all know that. He has made it very known about his power involvement. He has ordered things. He's made no bones about who he is. Now, I want to give you some credit here. And it's funny because I think you and I were on par here, because if you know anything about the Bronx, right? And Dom Sakali has recently talked about this a little bit. The power structure of what this family is mostly from the Bronx. And if you know Ernest Aiello, he is very connected to Mancuso. He is essentially an enforcer. But according to you, Ernie Aiello is the underboss, supposedly, of this family.
Yeah, I got that. I got that maybe 6 months ago. A lot of times people have to understand the way you report something. I don't just get something and run with it. I'll get something, I'll sit with it, sometimes up to a year or two. Some of the Philadelphia stuff we talked about, that, what I called a secret hit from the Mikey Chang, Joey 90s era. I sat on that for 5 years. So the Aiello information I got came to me about 6 months ago. I spent time vetting it, talking to people. He's a young guy. He's 43 years old. He is more of an enforcer than anything else, like you said. But with Mikey Mancuso, it's all about trust and loyalty. And since I reported that Ernie Aiello had been up to the underboss post in the last couple of years, I've had more people come out and confirm that to me. That even Ernie himself was sitting there reading that, getting mad about it, but saying like, how did he know this? Like, so I stand by it. And I think that the entire family right now, although Mancuso is the number one, everything to and from Mancuso is coming from Ernie Aiello.
And also remember, this is a family, when you look at the geography, right? You get the Bronx with Mancuso and Aiello. You got Brooklyn with Johnny Skyway, Vinny TV. You got Queens with the Asaros, the Pipitones. And, you know, you actually have some more pretty formidable guys kind of behind the scenes too. You know, Johnny Mulberry and, Fabrizio, who we'll get into.
He just got out. Yep.
You know, it's gonna be interesting to see. Now, I want to bring up kind of I was trying to find eccentric things that we see today with these individuals. I might be the only person that recognized this when it happened, and I owe a friend of mine at Barstool a kind of a thank you for this. A guy KFC that works for Barstool posted a bizarre TikTok from a Mets Twitter account. Okay. Which showed this individual, Anthony Calabrese, belittling the Mets on camera. Did you see that? It was kind of
that's Peter Rabbit's kid, I think.
Yeah, I think it was Peter Rabbit's grandson, Anthony's kid, that posted it. Okay. And I seen it right away. And I said, that's Anthony Calabrese, Staten Island, a capo, or not, maybe not a capo now, but was at one point. You know, Peter Rabbit was a long-standing capo. You know, and we kind of see kind of the different crews kind of elevating. And this group is, I think, a little bit more formidable. The problem is the guy at the top is very destructive.
Erratic.
Erratic's a great word, right? And you look at Ernie, too. He's known to be kind of an enforcer.
Right.
So.
And I think the person that stabilizes it all from, again, my reporting is Vinny TV. I heard that, you know, he's a former acting boss who I'm told is like the I'm not going to take credit for this. Someone else used this term, but I think it's a good term. He said that Vinny TV is the Mikey Nose whisperer. You know, the only person that can even come close to talking sense and rationale to Mikey Nose. So I think Battle of Many, Aiello, and Mancuso are running the family right now. I've reported about this family tension between them and the Camerano brothers. I'm confident that that's going to shake out in court documents before the end of the year. So I think I'll be proven right. There's been a number of people, at least online, that question my reporting on that, but I'm pretty sure that that's all going to come out in court documents sooner than later. But I think Vinny Battlemeni is probably the one that has prevented that situation from getting any worse than it already is.
One of the interesting things recently that's come out about the Bonanno crime family is that Fabrizio Di Franzisi was released from federal prison. This is a much older picture of the man they call the Herder. Fabrizio is an interesting guy, obviously with Bath Avenue crew, very much around, you know, the Tommy Reynolds, Jimmy Calandras, Joey Calco. He was made under TG. I know he slotted in with TG.
Yeah.
That crew is kind of in the hands now, essentially, of like the Palazzolas and the Vinny TVs. It'll be interesting to see where he slots in because, as you said, one of the more respected kind of elder statesmen in this family, you would go to like the Palazzolas, the Badalamentes. Another thing, you know, Anthony Pipitone, he's a former Giannini crew kid from Queens. I guess if we know this, he's going to have to get legit employment. You know, he's going to have to go into the regular thing. But all these guys, because like I've talked about, like Paulie Ragusa, who was with Giannini, he was kind of someone that's flirted with going back into that life. What do they do? What do you think of Fabrizio? Where do you think he slots in?
Well, I know that he's someone that has a lot of respect on the streets. I know that he's feared. I know that there's a lot of guys talking in the last couple of weeks about where he slots in. I've heard speculation. He did 23 years. He only had his button for, I think, 18 months before he went to jail. So he really hasn't experienced life as a made man on the outside for that long. I've been told that he's more of an enforcer type than an administrator type. That even if he got a capo post, it would be more, I don't want to say ceremonial, but he would be more of the muscle of the crew if he was taking it over. He's the last one standing of the Bath Avenue crew. You know, that group of youngsters that I think
outside of Tommy Reynolds, but he ain't. I don't.
Right,
I
he's never gonna get a button because he's Irish.
Right, and I think we've learned it. I've discussed this. I got some information for when he got his sentence taken down a little bit. He is going to like Maine, and he's out. So like he and you're right. He's not Italian anyway. So I think he's Fabrizio's kind of the last guy of that group, if you will. But yeah, bananas are interesting. You got John Spirito up in the Bronx too. There's a lot of different names that
he's younger. Johnny Joe's Johnny Joe Jr.
He's 64, I believe.
No. I think we're confusing two Johnny Joes.
I'm thinking of John Spirito.
There's two Johnny Joes.
Right. The kid. I don't. From what
the kid was an acting capo at one point.
Well, but a lot of people believe he made that up and was told that.
Okay. No,
I think the kid's like 40.
The kid's young. But my point though is that with a boss like Mancuso, where trust and loyalty is so important.
Yeah.
Johnny Joe Jr. has been with Ernie Aiello at all of these altercations that Ernie Aiello has proven his stripes over the last 10 years.
I remember people got a kick out of. He was arrested about 10 years ago, the kid, the junior, and he showed up in that white T-shirt with the glasses.
Yeah.
And he's with his mother, and that was that. But Colombo crime family, we really don't know. I think you and I probably both agree. It's kind of be a mix between the de facto kind of, favorite son, Teddy Persico, and, the old school Joe Waverly. But Joe Waverly's a stone cold gangster. Everybody knows it. He's very old. We also recently, I know you reported it was last week, Tommy Schatz got out. Now, Tommy Schatz is interesting, Scott, because if you know anything about him, he was actively writing a blog in prison.
Yeah, I know.
Which is interesting. We also got some, and I know you talked with this. Jerry Capisci reported that a capo, Richard Ferrara, is cooperating over, I think, 5 years. So like this family is mostly under indictment, facing charges. Mush Russo died. You got kind of a Teddy Persico who's also under indictment. Joe Waverly just got out, did a long stretch. Tommy Schatz did a long. I mean, this family is so dysfunctional.
Yeah, they've always been dysfunctional, but the Persico-Russo mob dynasty has been able to stay intact going on almost 50 years. And you have Teddy Persico, who's been, I think, Skinny Teddy. His dad was Big Teddy. I think Skinny Teddy has been someone that people have looked at for the last couple of decades as someone that was going to be free eventually and was going to kind of go into that position that they thought Little Alley Boy was going to be in before he got put away for the rest of his life 20 years ago. But as you said, he's got legal problems. But then you have Chucky Russo that just got out of prison. He's part of that same dynasty. He's only 70 years old. Tommy Schatz is another Colombo faction guy, or sorry, a Persico faction guy. So I think that's in some ways could be a saving grace for them, is that Tommy Schatz and Chucky have just got out.
And Tommy Schatz is a guy who I've done, I think, 2 shows on him, different through whether it's Dino Calabro or whoever. I did a show on Saturday on Little Angelo Spada, who is a very interesting associate that kind of ran some of the feasts and stuff. I mean, Spada was sending messages between Persico and Joeli. Joeli was street boss, took them through some calm waters. Mush Russo did that as well. But this is a family that, unfortunately, some of the strong people, they just never were able to elevate, whether it's go ahead.
Benji Castellazzo, he's the underboss. He's got one foot in the grave. I mean, he's 85 years old.
Yep.
And then the consigliere is this guy that I don't think many people had heard of outside of maybe if you were in the Colombo crime family. Big Ralphie Di Matteo was named the consigliere in the 2021 indictment. That's interesting, to find someone. It happens more often than you would think. Guys that have never been kind of on the chessboard for people like us to be moving around, and then the next thing you know, they pop up an indictment. Not only are they a soldier, or they're past capo, they're now in the administration, and we hadn't really ever heard of them. So,
well, see, the thing that when I heard the name DiMatteo, I thought it was Luca DiMatteo, who has been around for a while, has been arrested several times, and then I think Ralphie is his younger brother, and Ralph is funny because he was the only one that didn't get arrested that day, and then we saw him in a pool in Florida.
His son snaps a picture of him on a pool, puts it on social media to taunt the government,
and then he got arrested. But yeah, it's a dysfunctional family. Again, it's probably look. Teddy's kind of been groomed for a long time. Teddy, skinny Teddy Persico. Joe Waverly's around. We'd have to think. I mean, Tommy Schatz you'd have to think, is probably going to try to, just get some calm waters in his life. And he's been in prison a long time. The Genovese are next. I'm not going to spend much time here because we kind of know, pretty formidable group. We all know who's in control.
Yeah, it's Barney. He's the boss of bosses right now.
It's Barney. It's Michael Ragusa. I think the rated guy is Uncle Patty Falchetti, kind of the capo of that 116th Street crew. They're all kind of lockstep and barrel, all kind of from Harlem, that general vicinity. We're all in the 116th Street crew for the most part. They're low profile. They make money.
Yeah, that's the gold standard in New York. I think it's been like that for a long time. They're like the assembly line like efficiency, functional, stable. The leadership is rock solid. I think every young kid that's trying, that has aspirations in New York, even now, to say that those people exist is a lot smaller percentage than it used to be. But I think getting made into the Genovese crime family has a certain cachet, more so than maybe the other four.
You mentioned to me they're kind of trying to get to the fringes of these groups and trying to break down to get to the top. We have seen some indictments, Nicky Slash, Ralph Balsamo, but I've heard also Ralph Balsamo is not one of the more respected people in that family.
He's just close. Some of it has to do with proximity, but Balsamo just happens to be really close to Barney.
Right. I mean, the Bronx and Harlem, not far, as far as that vicinity. But, it's interesting because one of the things we've also heard from Chikeli, who not sure he would know because he hasn't been around that world in forever, but he has claimed before that he doesn't believe that Barney's the actual boss of that family. Look, they're all very powerful. They all make decisions, and they all stay out of the radar. It's going to be hard to ever take a case up the wrong. I think there's one or two photos of most of these individuals.
I know.
There's not. They're very, very, and that's another thing with Vinny TV. I think there's one photo of him as well. These guys are very low profile.
Well, Barney learned from the chin. So
also, I don't know if you know, but that Google image of him that was floating around, it's been taken off the internet from what I've saw.
The thing with him coming out of a pizza parlor?
Yeah, I think it's 187 in Crotona, I believe.
Yeah.
But another family that's pretty straightforward as well, Gambino crime family. We know obviously they're very dominated by the Sicilian faction. This has taken them to become a very powerful group. We obviously know Italian Dom Shefalou, Lorenzo Menino, who I think we all agree is kind of the figurehead of this group. They're Brooklyn guys, came up under John Gambino and Jackie Nose and Mikey Scars. We know Menino, he was supposedly the driver in a hit in the 80s, did time for it. Francesco Oliveira, I believe his name was, with Bobby Gabbert and those guys. These guys are really powerful. And then I think what they also did is said, you know what? We're mostly Sicilian. Let's kind of adhere to making some of the non-Sicilian people happy. We put Mickey Boy Paradiso in kind of to make everybody happy. And I think, and from what I know, I think it's common knowledge, Michael Paradiso is on the streets. He's in social clubs. He is a menacing character. You talk about, to me, the most interesting wiretapped person over the last 20 years is him. He has some really fascinating. The fact that he's never been hemmed up for life is crazy to me.
Yeah.
I mean, he literally threatened to kill his own daughter because she said she showed him disrespect. But I want to ask you about someone you reported on just last week. One of the names that we've heard kind of down the road, hierarchy material, Andrew Campos got out, made a lot of money. We're talking about the biggest consumer fraud case of all time in America. What do you think about Andrew?
Andy Campos, I think some people call him Sonny. This is everything you would want in a 21st century wise guy. He checks all the boxes, very polished, very well spoken, is just as comfortable, wearing a three-piece suit, and networking through boardroom scams and Wall Street scams than he is hanging out at a social club with the guys on the street. He's respected. He's a huge earner. He's a guy that everybody likes. He's very, very connected into the world of entertainment. It's been pretty well chronicled, his relationship with Sean P. Diddy Combs.
Do you think they still talk?
I don't know if they still talk now, but it was pretty documented in the 90s as Puffy was actually, as they were both kind of exploding in a positive way in their careers. Campos was becoming a mob star, and Puffy was busting into the pop culture ethos as this omnipresent mogul. I think there was quite a bit of documented.
I always remember, Scott, that
documented relationship
in like 2003, I think it was. Greg DePalma was caught on wiretap. Old Chatterbox gangster. Many people know his name. Where he discusses, hey, that guy that was here last week with P. Diddy? He just got pinched, in reference to Sonny Campos. So, their relationship, look, are they, do they hang out today? Probably not. It's been a long time. But I'm sure if they saw each other, on 7th Avenue or 5th Avenue and they ran in,
and I'm sure if one of them needed a favor, they would not feel shy calling the other.
Sure.
So, I think he's a guy that, again, from people that I've spoken to, and I'm confident in what they're telling me, Campos was recognized and tapped, kind of plucked in the 90s by the Gotti regime, even before this Sicilian regime took over, that Salvatore Locascio, Junior Gotti, they identified him early on in his 20s as a guy that they wanted to kind of fast track.
I believe there was a quote at one point. Gotti Sr. mentioned that he really liked Richie Martino, and he said, look, I need earners. I can't just have killers, right? I need people that are going to bring me money. And, look, they've had some, again, being as a huge, Jimmy Brown and
Richie Martino is a genius. Sure. He really is. He doesn't have a flashy nickname. He's not someone that is, you're going to put on the cover of the New York Daily Post and sell a lot of copies. But Richie Martino has been recognized by the federal government as well as the underworld as like the godfather of internet scamming and calling card scams and internet porn scams and credit card scams. The five families were not into any of that until Richie Martino showed them the way.
He's like he's like this new age kind of guy, right? It's pretty interesting.
They were doing a scam, I think, where they made their most amount of money on, where they were just putting up a porn site that was like a fake porn site, and you'd go and you'd give all your credit card information, and the next thing you know, you can't get onto the site, and your credit card information is being used to buy things all around the world.
I think they accumulated like $750 million. It was pretty incredible.
And Campos went down with Martino in that initial case in the 2000s, and then just went down with him again in the case that he just did. That
all kind of, they called Richie Martino, Richie from the Bronx, Campos from up that area, and then Torrey, who, look, I'm going to say this now. Okay. Look, every person we talk about are very bad people, right? We can all make that clear. They all are people that deserve whatever crime comes to them. But I'll again say this, and I'm sure you'll agree. One of the biggest miscarriages of justice ever in the Mafia is that Frank Locascio died in federal prison. I think it's absolutely abhorrent. Look, Scott, think about it. He was just in the room as a gangster, and John said, I'm going to kill someone. And the government said, well, why don't you step up and try to get him to not kill him?
What's he gonna, he's going to make a comment like that, and then he'll end up dead.
Right. It's I say this because I think Frank Locascio is such an interesting guy. There's footage on the internet. You can look it up. I strongly urge looking it up, of his funeral procession. It's actually beautiful. It's him and his family, the family walks it through the Bronx like a carriage ride. It's got this music playing. It's super cool, man. And
Sammy was 100 times more dangerous than Frankie Loke, and he's been out for 20 years.
Yeah, and then he has the nerve to say, "Well, I'd shave him if I could now," and it's well, you weren't saying that, bro, in the '80s or sorry, the '90s. But let's get to the final family, and then we'll get out of here. This has been a really enjoyable episode. I hope you guys are enjoying the show. It's always fun when Scott and I get together. Lucchese crime family is last, and I have to say they're probably more formidable than I think we give them credit for. They're not the Genovese or the Gambinos, but guys like Michael DeSantis and Patty Delarusso, both kind of long time. Guys been around. We know, DeSantis did time. Patty did time. We know they have a strong group in New Jersey with the Pernas, Ralph and John and Joe. It's funny, Scott. I did a video on the Pernas recently, and it was one of those videos where I got so many. These guys are just great people.
Everybody loves the Pernas.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I'm. In my opinion, these guys are gangsters of the core. I mean, my opinion, they're all doing time in New Jersey State Prison for racketeering. So they're gangsters. But it doesn't, just because you're a gangster doesn't mean you can't be likable.
And there's been some
doesn't mean you're a monster.
Right. There's been very noteworthy stories too with them. I mean, let's remember. I mean, one of them was, allegedly contracted to beat up the husband of a Real Housewife. Yeah. So, it's all noteworthy and newsworthy. These guys. You see him in pictures with Joey Merlino and John Panisi and whoever. So
if you go to my gangster report today, I actually just posted a story that I think is an interesting kind of historical footnote about Joey Perna. And this is props to Joey, man. Joey is quite the ladies' man. And Joey Perna, not once, but on 2 separate occasions, has dated maybe the most powerful woman in all of Hollywood. Her name's Pam Abdi. She is the studio boss at Warner Brothers right now. She was the studio boss over at MGM. And that was a high school girlfriend of Joe Perna's. And then they were in a long distance relationship in the 2000s, where Pam, before she became a studio boss, when she was a pretty prolific producer, was caught on a bunch of wiretaps from Operation Heat, which is the bust that put the Pernas all away. So, he wasn't just liked by people in the mob. I mean, this is a woman that is, want to talk about a boss. This woman is a boss.
That is, I have to admit, I mean, I'm always fascinated by the women these guys attract. I did a video recently on Donnie Shacks, who,
Elizabeth Hurley.
Yeah. Very, very formidable women. I have to admit, I mean, Pam Abdi, listen, Scott, there's 2 different types of women, right? There's attractive women, they have nice bodies or whatever, but there's something really sexy about a hot woman that has power, right? And you talk about Pam Abdi, I mean, she's like
huge. And I guess, according to an FBI file someone showed me the other day, and this isn't surprising, that they were in a relationship, and Pam Abdi's attorney admits that they were in a relationship, so this isn't being disputed. He was at both premieres of Garden State, the Zach Braff movie, which was actually produced by some Detroit guys that were tied to Dan Gilbert, and Quicken Loans, Rocket Mortgage. But he was at the New Jersey premiere of Garden State, Joe Perna was, and he was at the LA premiere back in 2004. So he obviously isn't just connected and well-liked in Jersey and in the East Coast. He can go out to LA and get some doors open for him.
Such an interesting group, these guys, man. And you look at it, they're always putting out pictures of them all at like a banquet or a party. Yeah. They all look, nice family, right? But Ralph Perna, I mean, he goes back deep. I mean, his father was super powerful. His brother was powerful. Michael Perna, I believe. Just a powerful.
Michael, from what I understand, I think it's cousin Michael, or maybe it's brother Michael, is the acting capo right now when Ralph finishes up his racketeering sentence.
They're real close with the Shadows, kind of that group. The Lucchese's have always had a strong standing group in New Jersey, but Perna's definitely an interesting group for sure.
I think the Lucchese's are kind of like a more functional Colombos, in that Vic Amuso has been the ultimate shot caller from behind bars now for 30 years. But the family hasn't broken out into war, and he still has people that are loyal to him running the show. Mike DeSantis, Patty Red, I think DeSimone allegedly is the consigliere.
Yep.
So,
by the way, if you're curious, Vic Camus was 88 years old, still alive. Tried to get out a couple of times from prison, but listen, I always say this. I mean, look, is Vic Camus is a bad guy. Bernie Madoff, bad guy. Lot of bad guys. Do I think Bobby Manna, bad guy? Do I think these guys should die in prison? No. I mean, why are we wasting our tax dollars on keeping these people incarcerated?
Well, I think these people should, if you're a convicted murderer, you should stay in there as long as like you physically can. But what I kind of question sometimes is when you have these guys, they're sociopaths, they're murderers, but they're 85, they're infirmed. There's no way that they can actually do the things that they're in prison for anymore. So to me, it's a waste of tax dollars not to let those people go home and die with proper medical care, and die with their families.
How many, look, we can all agree, like Casso's probably one of the most deranged people ever associated with the mob. How many of these murders first did Casso order? Amuso actually involved in actually doing any of them? A lot of it's conspiracy, commit
Even
murder.
John Stanfa from Philly, he's 90 years old. These guys,
yeah.
Again, I'm not in favor of letting these guys go, get out of prison and go travel around the world. Yeah. But if you're legitimately infirmed and you're legitimately have months or 1 or 2 years left to live, I think it's a waste of money.
Now, would it kill them to just say, would it kill them to just say, all right, we're going to give you a 5-year supervised release. You can go to your house, right? Like, do we really need him in prison? I mean, come on.
John Stanfa, if he got out right now, he'd be going into a nursing home.
Right. I mean, they're all in their 80s, like they have a few years left, if that.
We should talk about, this is a good segue to finish up with the Lucchese's. Their consigliere or their former consigliere, Joe DiNapoli, just came out of prison last month. He's 87, 88.
Right.
So he did 5 years. He got hit in that same racketeering murder case that brought down Stevie Wonder and Matty Madonna, but they got ensnared in the murder counts of it. Joe D was not, didn't face any murder charges. So he just had to do the 5 years of racketeering. He came out now, he's 87. I doubt that he goes back into the
Matthew Madonna's like 85, isn't he?
Oh yeah, Matty Madonna's in his 80s too, right?
Yeah, it's.
But what I'm saying is, I don't think Joe DiNapoli is going to come out of prison now and it's going to replace. Maybe I'm wrong, and it's going to replace DeSimone as the consigliere.
Agreed.
I think he's going to go home and die in another year or two because he's probably. I can't imagine the health issues that he's been going through, especially after being there during COVID.
And if you know anything about the prisons, it's not like they say to you, "You're old, so we'll treat you better." It's like that. No,
it's bad. It's bad.
But hey, we know that the FBI hates the mafia, and they're never going to really do much to make it easier on them, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, great show. I think people will love this. I hope you all enjoyed it. It's always nice to every, let's say 8 or 12 months, kind of jump in, talk a little bit about the current stuff going on. I like that you did a show recently. You kind of really kind of focused on just the people that got out, and you likened it to that Sopranos episode where
Class of 04.
The pundits. Yeah. And Tony's like pissed off, and he doesn't like the pictures they're showing of certain people. And Scott, good to see you. Always good to have you on. Check out Scott, as I said, Gangster Report. Check out his podcast, Original Gangsters Podcast. You can find it in the description of this video. I said before, I don't give a lot of kind of head nods to anybody, but people like Scott, Jimmy, they're some of the best in the business.
We all do it for me, Jimmy, you. There's a couple other guys. We do it for the love of it, for the love of this stuff. And again, comes across.
Scott has always been so approachable, man, because, I know it's not easy, man. Like, I've talked to a lot of guys, talk about authors that like, they kind of big time me and other people. And Scott was always super, super good and super welcoming. So I'm glad to be able to do stuff. It's kind of an honor to do shows with you. And go check out Mafia Prince too. One of the best mob books of all time.
Let's hope it gets made into a television show or a movie soon.
we can only hope for a Phillies.
Yeah,
win.
let's hope.
You know, Scott, good to see you. Thanks for coming on. We'll see you guys next week here on the Sit Down.